If you think this kind of combat is more engaging than this kind of combat, fuck you. You're part of the problem. If you think this death penalty is preferable to this death penalty, fuck you. You're part of the problem. If you expect a group of people in the game like this instead of like this, fuck you. You're part of the problem. I'm about to be 30 years old. I'm currently 29 and the year is 2025. The last successful MMO that came out was launched in 2004. Their names, RuneScape and World of Warcraft. Since 2004, in my entire adult life, there hasn't been a single MMO launch that has surpassed the products that were put out since 2004. What other industry has failed so dramatically where they cannot create superior products than that were on the shelves over 20 years ago? And so, we have to ask ourselves a very important question. Who is to blame? Who is to blame for the most pathetic industry, the most pathetic gaming genre to ever exist? And what I've come to the conclusion of is that the only person we have to blame is you. This is not a developer problem. This is a player demand problem. Why was there such a clear moment of regression when it came to the MMO industry? And can we actually pinpoint that moment in time in which we began to feel that regression as a player? Because I can. I remember very vividly when World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King first introduced Group Finder into World of Warcraft. It is very clear now to us in 2025, but it was less clear to us then. But how evident is it to us now that that was the beginning of the end, not just for World of Warcraft, but for the later MMO industry as we know it today? Why? Why did this happen? And so as this game amassed a level of popularity that was more or less unheard of, not just in the MMO industry, but the gaming industry as a whole, well, what did the developers decide to do? Well, they did what any good-minded, tech-oriented business person would do, which is listen to the feedback of their customers. And if you're someone who spent any amount of time in the United States tech industry, which I've been fortunate enough to spend a career in, you would understand how valuable it is from the company's perspective for them to get feedback so that they can pivot and make different changes to their products with the idea in mind of addressing the concerns that most people have when delivering this feedback. And in most cases, companies do a pretty good job at differentiating good feedback from bad feedback and doing the things that they know they should be doing, even though people are telling them they want something else. What bad companies do is that they listen to all of the feedback and put the responsibility of the decision making and the vision for their product on the consumers rather than having their own vision themselves and creating something that they know that they will want but can't articulate. To quote the late, great Steve Jobs, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. Can you imagine Steve Jobs reacting to feedback over the iPhone and making design decisions that went against his vision? Of course he would never do that, because he knows that his vision is going to be the vision that consumers want. They just don't know it yet. But he had the confidence and belief in himself and in his products to deliver that to customers because he knew that they would want and appreciate them even if they didn't know it yet. And what the MMO industry failed to do is they failed to align themselves with the original developer decision, the original thesis of what made these games and these worlds special. And in replacement, they've bent over backwards to serve the lowest common denominator. They bent over backwards to serve some guy who works a full-time job, and when he comes home from work and after looking after his 4 kids or whatever, wants to spend an hour a day on his computer and have access to the same experience when it comes to his MMO as the no-life kid spending 12 hours a day in his college dorm room, drinking Red Bull and geeking out over the game 24/7. Instead of catering to that young kid in the college dorm room and giving him the ultimate experience that he's going to remember for the rest of his life, a world that he can literally allocate his entire mind and energy to and lose himself in, so that he can forget all the bullshit of the real world that he has to wants to escape from, right? Instead of catering to that person, the entire industry bent over backwards to cater to fucking Joe Tilley, so that when he comes from home from work and wants to take care of his 4 fucking kids, he's got the same access to fun as fucking loser John, who just spent the last 2 weeks locked in his apartment so that he could grind 20 levels so that he could finally attend his first raid. The industry chose wrong. They allied with old, weary men instead of complete fucking losers. And until the industry corrects that mistake, we will forever be plagued by bullshit after bullshit MMO. And look, while there's a long laundry list of examples of the gameplay decisions that developers get wrong because they listen to players' feedback, I think, first and foremost among them, and the one I'll touch upon a bit in this video, is button mashing gameplay and why it's unnecessary and generally sucks in the MMO context. I want to be very clear why button mashing rotation gameplay sucks and has no purpose inside an MMO and only makes them worse. Because it replaces decision making with muscle memory. So you're just repeating the same things over and over again. You're not actually engaging with the things on the screen. It flattens skill into just repetition instead of actually having to make the correct judgment call at a specific point in time. It turns combat into maintenance, not danger. You have an expected outcome when you hit your rotations instead of having an unexpected result of things that could happen. It shifts focus from the world, so what's in front of your screen, to your UI. All you care about is making sure that the buttons on the screen are being pressed in the right order, because if you press them in the right order, you're achieving maximum DPS output. And since all you care about is achieving maximum DPS output because it's all that fucking matters, that's all you're concerning yourself with, not the actual gameplay on the screen. And finally, it makes enemies feel small before the fight even begins. You know what you're going to do before you actually engage in the fight. That's not interesting or compelling. That's lame gameplay. And button mashing has no purpose inside an MMOs when simply auto-attacking a mob and using stuns when they're casting a spell suffices. And look, I don't blame you, you just came from World of Warcraft being your game, and so that's all you really have to experience as far as the MMO world is concerned. So you can't really even fully appreciate all that was lost among the years and truly how far the MMO industry has fallen. For instance, here's my list of what was lost. A shared world with no instances. It is such a shame. Such a shame. Even when I'm playing vanilla World of Warcraft, when I load into a zone like Deadmines, the game converts from a fun multiplayer interactive experience where people doing things in the world matters and has consequences, and it has now turned into a single player experience where I'm just button mashing versus mindless NPCs with some friends. An MMO's promise is a multiplayer experience. I'm not interested in running a linear dungeon, beating NPCs that pose no challenge and are trivial. What I find interesting and engaging are the social dynamics and social gameplay that comes from people having to share a world together and figuring out the best way to live amongst one another. That's interesting. That's engaging. That's what makes MMOs unique. And so the fact that almost every single dungeon and raid in newfangled MMOs are instanced rather than being a shared world that creates for interesting social dynamics and interplay between different groups of people who all want the same thing, that was lost. Leveling. The idea of actually caring about your journey and really being immersed in the world as you experience what your character is and who you want to become. These are role-playing games, and we all want to play a certain role, whether that's the tank, the cleric, the CC guy, the puller, the ranger who sits in the back and twiddles his bow. Right? We all have an identity that we want to craft with our digital perception of ourselves in these online worlds. And that is something that we shape over time. We develop a reputation among people that we run into as being that guy. And that idea of having this reputation that carries with you as you level and caring about that process, that has completely gone away in the last 20 years of MMO gaming development. And that's a real shame, because some of my fondest memories of MMOs back in the day was like being level 12, being level 20 in a dungeon. This whole idea that MMOs are about the end game raid scene is a plague, and that's because of bad game design decisions, because players just think that they want to experience the end game. It's a player problem, not a developer problem. And so at the end of the day, what was really lost was the social connectivity that MMOs promised. Because when developers made the worlds too easy, not punishing enough, well, as a player, I no longer needed friends. I no longer needed help. And because I didn't need these things, why would I pursue them? And so because the worlds became too comfortable, too easy, not punishing enough, not hard enough, they began to feel less real, became less engaging, and became worse products that has created the worst timeline possible for someone who wants to lose themselves inside an MMO. Now, I want to end on a positive note. Think to yourself, back in 2010, World of Warcraft reached a scale no MMO has touched since. It was the envy of the entire gaming industry. The genre did not grow to achieve that scale because friction was removed. It grew while friction was the point of it. When players later pushed to eliminate inconveniences, consequences, and dependency, the numbers didn't climb higher. They flattened until they fell into the pit of misery that we are in today. The lesson we need to learn as an MMO community is that quality of life changes that supposedly make the world easier for us to live in instead rip away the magic of it all. The genre didn't lose its magic by accident. It was negotiated away feature by the people who claim to love it the most. And that's the tragedy, and that's the mistake we as a community need to rectify.